Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Blooming Daily. I cannot believe it, but it's exactly 1 month until my graduation from Bowdoin. So, this is a really bittersweet time to be back in the studio because I clearly remember the first time I was here to record. But this is also a really special episode for me to be making because there's so many emotions attached, and I'm super excited about the person I'm recording with. So welcome again to the studio, with me to the studio, and to another episode of Blooming Daily. Today we'll be speaking about a topic I think we often overlook, which is our hearing. This is so vital and such an important part of how we show up to the world, how we interact with people, how we just even interact with ourselves in certain spaces. So I'm super excited to be recording this episode and to be recording with someone who is super awesome. I'm telling you, he's amazing. With me here in the studio is Brian.
Hello. Thank you. I'm so honored to be on the Blooming Daily. I remember seeing when you started it out like a couple years ago. I was like, wow, this is such a beautiful idea. And I totally get the bittersweet thing because I have my last concert in a week too.
Yes.
And it's like, wow, we really are just a month left and we're departing into the real world.
We are. So Brian is also a senior here at Bowdoin. So we both share this bittersweet mutual feeling. So Brian, how are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty good. Today was a very hectic day. I feel like I was in meetings and interviews for the whole day, but I'm so glad and grateful to have had all those things too. Like I feel very full and energized.
Yeah.
How about you?
I totally hear you. I also had a really long day. I had a class and then lab and meetings and all of that. And I was just running from place to place, and I hosted an event for a club. But the weather was gorgeous. It's
always so, I don't know, I get so happy when I see people on the quad.
Yes.
And see so many faces that also are new to me.
Yes.
When they come out.
Yes. I just loved. So it's spring now, and for those not in the US / in the New England region, it's a lot warmer now, and a lot of people have been coming outside to sit outside to do work, to eat on campus. So it's really nice to see a lot of people outside and to just walk around without a puffy jacket.
Yeah, I feel like it's extra kind of nice because it was snowing in April too.
Yes.
Or like pretty late into April too.
So I'm really happy that it's warm, and it also reminds me that the semester is about to end, because every year the moment it started getting warmer like this, I knew that we had only a few weeks left before the end of the semester.
Yeah,
so this feels like
it is kind of crazy. Like when we're going to experience the nice weather and the short sleeves, we have to leave in about 2 weeks.
Exactly. So, but yes, very grateful for the weather despite it being a hectic day. And I really like what you said, Brian, about being thankful to have had those things, because I also try to remind myself that all these things I'm having to do are because I have the privilege to do them, to go to lab and to go to my classes and to have the meetings with the people I met and to be able to sit in the studio with you to record.
Likewise. I mean, that's the beauty at being at Bowdoin, I think, that you get to experience so many different backgrounds and also people. And I don't know, being able to have that really fulfills me. It makes me feel full.
Yeah, I totally agree. So we are going to dive into this episode again about how our hearing impacts our overall wellness and how to take care of our auditory health. And I'm just going to ask a little bit more about you, Brian, for people to know a bit more about you and what you do on campus in terms of your academics or other extracurriculars and the things you enjoy doing outside, the things you do for work or school, and the spaces you take up on Bowdoin's campus.
Yeah, I can do like an elevator pitch for myself. No, but Yeah, I study, computer science and math in my academic life.
Snap.
Though I'm very interested in the intersection that it has with like issues that are existing around the world and also the humanities. And that kind of culminates in some experiences I have with the McKean Center, where I'm a program coordinator for the alternative breaks trips. And I just led one to Belize a couple of weeks ago. And we were kind of looking at the intersection of environmental conservation and music making. And, you know, you can approach that from a biological lens or a statistical lens, but there's certainly also the aspect of culture and the community that's surrounding and their relationships with the land that they occupy, which I think is so important too. And for the music part, then that opens up kind of the other interest that I have. I love piano, and I spend most of my waking hours, if I have free time, playing piano and practicing piano. So for anyone who's on campus, they have probably seen or heard me practicing very frequently in Studzinski Hall. But I'm playing a concerto with orchestra this year. Yes,
I saw that.
Which is, I'm so excited. This concerto has been a piece that I've wanted to play since I was probably like, I don't know, 6 or 7.
Oh my goodness.
And I would like keep my dad up at night, showing him videos of people performing this piece. And it's just so wild that I'll be able to play it now. Like I still haven't even actualized that the orchestra, like these people are learning the parts and we're getting to play together. And my parents will actually be here next weekend to see the concert. But that's another thing that I like to do. And I mentioned coffee in my rapid fire questions about like things that make me happy. Or I forgot the question, but I'm a huge coffee enjoyer. I don't know if you know Jacob Stern.
I do know Jacob.
He's also a big coffee aficionado. And one day we did a coffee tasting together. But I love making espresso, and I have an espresso machine, and that's like a ritual, a morning ritual that I have before I go out to eat breakfast.
And you're reminding me of Mohammed.
Yes, that's true.
Who also loved Mohammed Akabi, who also loved coffee, and is definitely someone I associate coffee tasting with. Like when you mentioned that, I just thought of him.
Yes, he's come over for a couple of espresso tasting events that I've tried to host. He does like a different kind of coffee. It's called pour over, where it tastes a little lighter, and you get more clarity in a way. So, you know, it is kind of weird when you think about coffee bags tasting like strawberries or like blackberries and like caramel and chocolate, but you could really get that from the coffee if you think about it. I mean, it's not that the strawberries and those ingredients are in the coffee, but it's just reminding you of it and the taste. But a pour over, you get slightly more clarity in getting those notes. Espresso tends to just be really strong, but I kind of enjoy that. And it's kind of fun to make it. And that's like something that, I don't know, it's been giving me a lot of kind of happiness throughout the day. So I was like, I'm like, you know, doing work and I want something else to kind of like fiddle around with. Trying to think what other things I like to do on campus.
So does taking espresso, do you take espresso at any point of the day? Because
no, I have a cutoff usually around 2 p.m.
Okay.
And there's various research articles on like when people should be having caffeine or not. But the general principle is 2 p.m. is like the cutoff, because by the time it's 10 p.m., there will be a quarter of the caffeine that you've consumed left over. And
really?
Yeah, and that's not a horrible amount. But yeah, it's very interesting to get into that. And, you know, like there's also the distinction people make with tea that has less caffeine, but it also has certain compounds that makes you a bit more relaxed. So that's why some people say coffee makes them really jittery, whereas tea, they feel more relaxed. It's not just because it's less caffeine.
Yes.
But yeah, I could talk for hours on coffee. And
that is so funny.
Yeah, huge shout out to Mohammed, actually. he still sends me bags and we still talk about coffee.
Wait, that's so sweet. For context, Mohammed is not on campus. He's not at Bowdoin anymore, but he is still at Bowdoin.
That's right. He visits Bowdoin quite a lot.
I see Mohammed every semester. I see him. I see him a lot. That I've almost as if he's actually at Bowdoin. So, yes, big shout out to him. So I wanted to dig more into your experiences with using a hearing aid. And for those who don't know, Brian uses a hearing aid, and I think that's something that is a unique experience because it's connected to such an important sense that we possess. And so I was curious to just hear some more background about that and when you started using it and how long that has been. Yes.
Yeah. I feel like, hearing loss is always something that's hard for people to imagine because, I mean, anything where you lose a bit of your sense, for someone who does have that sense, it's always hard to imagine what it's like without it. But yes, I do have cookie bite hearing loss, which means that my mid-frequencies are the lowest. Like I have the least ability to hear mid-frequencies, although for all frequencies, my hearing is is well below normal hearing. And I think a statistic that helps some people like actualize what my hearing loss is like is that if you do like a word test, like you asked me to say words back that you have said without with covering your mouth, I would only be able to get about 50% of the words.
Wow,
that
that's
you say.
so interesting.
And that's most likely because, you know, as I was growing up, and hearing aids were not as good when I was growing up. Like even 20 years ago, the technology is so different from what we have today. I lost a lot of the kind of like experiences people have developing vocabulary and like being able to even participate in activities. But yeah, I was born with hearing loss, and I think my parents realized around age 3, and when I was like 5 or 6, I got my first iteration of hearing aids. I had a lovely audiologist. I still have fond memories of her. And she gave me these hearing aids that are so massive compared to the ones I have now. They're probably like the size of your palm.
Those are huge.
And they don't do that great of a job too, because at that time, it was, I mean, technology has changed so much even in the past decade. And so the granularity of like the sounds I would hear from a person is not the same as like just if you had normal hearing. And so I feel like growing up a lot, it was always difficult for me to connect with people verbally. And in a way, that's kind of how I attribute my love for music, where that love came from, because I would spend a lot of time developing my self-expression through that means, because it felt like it was more continuous than trying to decipher what people were saying through language. But that's like a general overview of my hearing loss. And now it does not affect me as much, which is interesting. I think maybe starting from my first year at college, my hearing loss has become much less of a focal point in my like daily thoughts. And that could be there could be many reasons why, and maybe one of it is just growing up and like having more experience with hearing loss. It could also be the community that you're a part of. It could be how I'm kind of learned more about my body and how also about my mental health and what I do well with, and how do I navigate through situations where I feel uncomfortable because of my hearing loss. But
wow, that is that is just so interesting to hear. Really, I feel like I'm lost for words because I have not had a conversation of this sort with someone who has experienced hearing loss and is using a hearing aid before. I haven't had this. So for me, this is really an eye opener. And one of the reasons before we started recording this episode, I was telling Brian that for me, this is also an important episode because I want to learn a lot, and I want to learn about your experiences, and I want to hear about how you've been moving through the world with your hearing aids, and just how it falls into the background of your life, because, I'm assuming you're not constantly thinking about it. So I think I was very curious to hear about your story and to hear the ways your hearing has impacted your life as we speak about how important the sense of hearing is. So thank you.
No, I think it's a beautiful way of framing it. And I thank you for having the opportunity to have this conversation too, because I think the constant conversation and flow of information between people really kind of enriches the conception we have of a certain thing like hearing. And I've naturally have been thinking a lot about hearing. And one of the things that has been on my mind a lot is the connections between our senses to other senses and also to the way our body functions. I have this distinct study that I remember hearing from my statistics professor, Jack O'Brien.
You remember hearing from your statistics?
That's right. Yes, but he said something along the lines of your oral health has an impact on your mental health. And it's like, there's some function that's mapping the relationship between that.
Yes.
And there certainly is true for hearing and the mental health too. I have read studies of, people who have normal hearing even, and then as they grow older, they lose a bit of their hearing. A lot of them are reluctant to get hearing aids, but studies have shown those people are actually at a greater risk for Alzheimer's related diseases because of their, inability to kind of connect and continue forming conversations. And they're losing like a sense, or at least it's degrading.
Yes.
And so I think this is a really important conversation to have. One beautiful thing that I think hearing loss has given me is to be more in tune with my body. And I feel like I've been challenged in a way to ask these questions a bit earlier in my life. Like, do I feel like I am engaging with people well? Like, are the communities that I'm forming truly something that I feel is sustainable? And as I'm navigating this world with, this sense that's degraded, like hearing, how can I kind of forge a sustainable path forward?
That is so beautiful to hear. And you're making me think of various things now. I wanted to go into auditory health, but before I go into that, I wanted to ask something about, you said you've been more in tune with your body, and I feel like
that's
the word
kind
tune,
of a fun.
the word tune, and the more we're speaking, the more I'm realizing, I guess the words like, in tune with your body, and I remember those just listening to you use these words that are specific to hearing, and now I'm just wondering how it to be for how different people relate with these words based on their hearing capacities, and like but that was just something on my mind. Going back to auditory health, just a really quick should I say crash course on auditory health. Auditory health is basically our entire hearing system, and this includes our outer ear, our middle ear, our inner ear, our auditory nerve and brain. And these are basically things that come together to help us, capture sound, respond to sound, process sound, and all of that. And I think sometimes we forget that auditory health is such a part of how we find balance in the world. You need your auditory health to find balance and to find your orientation when you're standing, when you're sitting. You need your auditory health to be able to communicate with people. And by communicate, not just speaking with people, but receiving information, the two-way communication flow. And you need your auditory health to even tolerate sound. And a fun fact that people might not know is that hearing is one of the first senses developed in the womb. baby skin. Babies can hear sounds by the 18th week of pregnancy. That's why you notice, I don't know if you've seen videos or you've even seen people when they speak, like maybe a pregnant person speaks to, her tummy, and then the baby responds, and I've seen videos like that, and where the baby can recognize the voices of maybe the mom or the dad, or or some the voice of the person they've heard over and over again. And when the person speaks close to the womb, there's a sensation that comes. So that is something that many people don't realize. But the auditory health is developed really early because it's such an important part of our health. So going back to you, Brian, I wanted to speak more about your experiences with having a hearing loss and using a hearing aid. And because some of the ways that our hearing health and auditory health impacts our entire health is our mental health. Because, with a hearing loss or using a hearing aid, there can be isolation or anxiety, social anxiety or depression. It impacts our cognitive health. You rightly mentioned, Alzheimer's or dementia. I've read about that. Even physical safety. It can impact your physical safety. You might not hear when you're trying to cross and all of that. So I really wanted to hear about your experiences with this.
Yeah. This is a funny anecdote. But about the physical safety, it's kind of related. My physical safety was not harmed in any way from this anecdote. But I remember in my first year in college in Main Hall with, Zunine.
Yes.
And we were rooming together, and there was a fire alarm that got pulled. I don't think it was a drill, but it wasn't anything that was unsafe. But I was sleeping at that time, and I actually didn't hear the fire alarm go off, and Zunan had to wake me up. Once I woke up, I did hear the sound, but it was just kind of funny that, wow, I could have slept through that.
Yeah. And were you wearing your hearing aid then?
No. So when I go to sleep before I shower, I take off my hearing aids, and that's kind of, it's done its job for the day. And I put on my hearing aids after I've brushed my teeth and put on my clothes. So that's kind of like the time frame of when I wear my hearing aids. But there are many instances where I feel like I'm constantly questioning myself, whether it's in like conversations with friends in a loud setting, like the dining hall sometimes can get really loud.
Yes,
I can see myself zoning out, and I always question, like, am I zoning out faster than other people zone out? Because that's like something that I've learned as I've grown up. And in elementary school, having friends who would not invite me to like play with them during recess because I couldn't hear the instructions. Yeah. That's happened. And there's I feel like almost everyone has experienced this, but if you don't hear something, you ask them 3 times and then it's like, oh, never mind.
Yes.
But that was really, really common for me in elementary school and growing up to high school, because that time your brain is still developing, so a lot of things are new experiences.
Yes.
And so you would likely have to ask them to repeat it again. And then with hearing loss, it's even worse. So going back to that like scenario of like me zoning out, I feel like that was something that I kind of learned to do as I was growing up, for better or for worse, most likely for worse, because it was almost a coping mechanism. Like I couldn't listen anymore, so I'm just gonna retreat into my own world. But I always try to flip it on its other side, because this is intense reflection for myself. I'm not thinking of it in perhaps a negative way, but just seeing what are the things I could do. I want to always make sure that I'm not letting myself down in a way for like future me. And so I take that with a lot of like, I put a lot of responsibility on myself when I'm in conversations to make sure that I'm trying to connect with people and make sure that the conversation is valuable. In a way, words are more valuable for me than other people.
Yes.
Because, you know, even in this will like give you more perspective on like my hearing loss, but even in classrooms, there are many times I would have to ask for my peers for what was said. And there
really?
are, yes, yeah, especially in classrooms. And it's something that I've learned to kind of deal with, but if, you know, as I'm reflecting on it right now and speaking about it, it is quite a remarkable thing to have to go through in a way.
It is. And I'm curious why you speak about that. When you ask them, is it while the professor is speaking, or how would you do that when the professor is speaking?
Yes, a lot of times they'll be speaking and they keep going on, and I didn't catch many things they say, so I'll ask my friends. There are a lot of times where like jokes are made, and like I would have to ask my friends like, what is happening? And
the joke is not the same the second time.
Exactly. But yeah, all these things in a way are so normalized to me now, but there are these little hiccups across the day that happens. But I mean, in a way that stresses how important auditory health is.
Yes.
Because you think about all these hiccups that I'm going through and all the things that I have to ask other people to rely on, like that I have to rely on them for. But I also feel I'm kind of in peace with myself. Like I can control what I can control in a way.
Yeah, that is, you're saying a lot. You're bringing in a lot of the complexities with this and putting them together so beautifully by acknowledging, yes, these hiccups are there, but they're not the end. You know, you've lived with them this whole time and you're thriving. By the way, I'm emphasizing thriving because Brian is thriving on campus.
Thank you. I try. I think it gives me a lot of motivation in a way. But, you know, also other people, like everyone has their own hiccup in a way and their own, not disability, but something that affects them. And the beautiful thing is I feel like a lot of people at Bowdoin have learned to kind of not treat it as something that's holding them back, but as another angle to look through the world and form a perspective on the world.
Yes.
And that's, you know, that doesn't have to be a good or bad thing. We don't have to make an assessment on that. But that kind of deep thought on how things are affecting us and, you know, how I could do something that would kind of reinvent the way I'm living.
Yes.
Anyway, I think that's a beautiful thing to try to do.
That is a beautiful thing. And I'm glad to see the way you're doing it for yourself. And I was curious to know what has changed since you've come to college, about how you view using a hearing aid or having a hearing loss from, let's say, high school. I'm curious to know a bit more about what has changed and why it has changed. I know you've spoken a little bit about growth has made some things change, but I'm curious to know, more about what has changed, about how you view your hearing since coming to college.
I mean, I view my life as a constant progression of growing. And so this is all under kind of the lens of growth. But one of the things that's kind of a subset of growth is that I've learned to really embrace my own personality. I feel like one of the beautiful things of coming to Bowdoin is the diversity of like all the people and the backgrounds of all the people. And in a way, it's pushed me to not feel afraid to lean into asking people to repeat what they've said. Like, even that sounds so simple, but it really is true. In high school, like, I would not ask people to repeat things they said.
Yes.
And I was very much an introvert in the last years of high school because I felt kind of comfortable in my own place. Like, I grew up in Irvine, California, and that was the only place I've lived. And so I've never really experienced kind of being pushed in a way. And I think in college, it did push me, like, to be more uncomfortable, but be more comfortable being uncomfortable. And that is something I think that's profoundly impactful for your health too. and it's not necessarily related to just auditory health, but in general. And I think like being pushed to be more uncomfortable, to take up like opportunities and say yes to things that were not necessarily something high school me would have said yes to. It was such a beautiful thing for the growth, and it did affect the way I am dealing with my hearing loss. Like, I'm more open about my hearing. I'm more open about myself as a consequence of that too.
Wow, that is so beautiful. I'm just like, wow, Brian, I'm feeling so inspired listening to you speak about this. And now I'm curious to know because I've seen that you've grown a lot learning about yourself and about your hearing and about what hearing loss is. I'm curious to know whether there's some misconceptions you've frequently encountered with people, whether you still encounter them or you once encountered them, maybe they're not as frequent now, because I think it might be a good thing for you as you reflect on them, but it might also be good for other people to think, oh, actually, this is a misconception I just unconsciously had, but didn't know. I guess this would be a good reflective exercise for everyone listening to this.
Yeah, I feel like this question I can spend hours talking about this question. But I think one of the most basic ways to understand it is to first understand what hearing aids are doing in a way.
Yes.
And, and, you know, like what people are normally hearing, they would maybe assume that's what people with hearing loss but are wearing hearing aids are hearing. But again, it's like a tiny little device that's living on your ear. It can only do so much in a way. And when it's projecting the sounds to my ear, there's a certain kind of lossiness of it. We're not going to get the same kind of continuous sound you would get from the way evolution designed our ear, or like the way the human body was designed. We are only so good at technology. We cannot replicate that yet. And so when I can't hear people, it's not a matter of volume. I think one of the things most people would do implicitly when I say I can't hear them is to speak louder. But in a way, that's just increasing the noise in my ears. It's not actually helping with the clarity of what's being said. So a lot of times when I say like, oh, I can't hear that well, like, could you say again? Really, I just need a bit more clarity in what's in the way you're enunciating the voices, instead of being like loud and yelling, which is not something I've experienced too much recently. And maybe that's because I've been so long in the Bowdoin community, and so like people know me and I know them. But definitely when I was younger, there were people, you know, maybe they do it kind of somewhat lightheartedly, but they would yell at my ear. And I'm like, that's not helpful. You're saying it so loud too, it's hurting my ears. So that's definitely one misconception people have with hearing loss. And I guess another thing is not necessarily a misconception, but we don't consider with hearing loss, there's a lot of baggage that comes with it too. Like, not, especially if you've grown up having hearing loss. Like, I naturally just didn't participate as much in conversations. And so sometimes I feel like when I'm in large groups, and it's maybe a combination of me not being a total extrovert too, but I'd be like, this feels really hard for me to jump in. And it's always, you know, I don't feel like I want to project my hearing loss in conversations and talk about it. But it's always something that's like implicitly in the background. I mentioned earlier that like hearing loss is not something that I think about all the time now, but it definitely exists in like the shadows every time I'm in a conversation. And so, yeah, like it is very difficult for me sometimes to have like to speak and to feel like I can form coherent thoughts and to like bounce off of people. And that's just the nature of how I grew up. Like a lot of times people would say things and then I wouldn't really respond back immediately. And trying to think of other misconceptions that people have. But really, I think the main one is the discontinuous nature of hearing aids. It doesn't replicate what people hear. In the same way that I think or in a different way that I think glasses do. Because glasses, in a way, it's pretty much good. Like once you have the right prescription glasses, other than the frames, which is kind of annoying, the vision aspect is very similar to if you remembered what 2020 looked like. But it's not the same for hearing. I never knew what perfect hearing sounded like, but this is something that has been well studied.
That's very interesting to hear, and I'm glad you mentioned, because I also didn't know what it was like. I didn't know the continuous versus non-continuous parts of using a hearing aid, and that's definitely something I'm now that it's bringing up a lot of questions in my mind, because I'm wondering now with music. How, going back to music, when you play or when you're in an orchestra, because you play with the orchestra, what's that like then when you're not just playing by yourself, but a lot of instruments are playing at the same time? And maybe when you're playing, I don't know if you've ever played for a choir before, what's that like? So now I'm really curious to know what it's like when you're now listening to multiple sounds and multiple layers of sounds,
Yeah. In a way, my only reference point was my hearing that I have since I was born. So it's not like I knew another way of hearing, which I guess is kind of a beautiful thing, because I can be a bit kind of ignorant in a way. But for me, when I practice and I play music, it's really built from just so much love for the music that I play. A lot of the pieces that I've played, I've heard countless times.
So
one
beautiful.
of the, I guess, really nice things of hearing aids is I can connect it Bluetooth to my phone. So in a way, it can act like AirPods, which is kind of which is a...
Wait, I didn't know.
Yes.
That's actually so cool.
That's right. Sometimes, I don't know if you've seen me, but some people who would approach me while I'm walking and they say hi, you'll see me like double tap my ear. But that's for me to stop listening to music. But this actually kind of opens up another fond memory I have, which was like growing up, my family, we would go on a lot of road trips, or we would visit family in Taiwan, and constantly was I listening to music. Especially classical music, and the concerto I'm playing with orchestra was one of the pieces that I listened to nonstop for months and years. My schedule was that I would find a new piece as I was growing up, and then I would just listen to that piece for however long, like weeks or months, until I got sick of it. And then I would find a new piece and add it to the playlist and do the same thing. But I guess a consequence of that is I've developed such a intuition for the music in a way. Like I know it by ear, almost one-to-one. Like I can hear the music in my ear. I tell my friends this, but sometimes I just cannot sleep for times because I can't stop the music in my head. I'm just like improvising or composing or playing back music in my head.
Oh my goodness.
And that I think that just goes to show how much I love to just talk and gush about music and think about music. And so it really makes playing just trying to get closer to the interpretation I want. And yes, that requires a lot of listening, but I think I've lived this life so long now that I have a semblance of a methodology for what I should be picking out. And yeah, so it's in a way, like what I said earlier, I'm just developing a new angle to this hearing issue that we have, maybe, or like not the hearing issue, but the question of how do I deal with hearing and how do people process hearing. When I hear the horns, or like I hear the trumpets and the flutes and the strings in the sections as I'm practicing, maybe it's not as clear, maybe it's not as granular as what the regular person hears, but I've kind of learned to adapt to listen for that instead. The human body is remarkably good at adaptation. I don't know if you've seen this too, but people with hearing loss sometimes develop better vision, and people with vision loss also develop better hearing.
I was, oh my goodness. I was going to ask you, although I didn't know how to ask it since you were born with it. I was going to ask if you feel like you have a stronger sense of, I don't know what else. I wanted to say it can't be sight because you're also wearing glasses. So I was going to ask if you have a stronger sense of any thing else, because growing up, I used to hear that people who lose one sense often then have another sense that becomes stronger. But I didn't know whether that was also your case since you were born with it. So
I guess it also depends on what people define as their metric of stronger. Because I feel like one thing that's definitely true is I'm much more aware of my surroundings. And, you know, that's in a way like a visual cue. I'm always watching people's body language and always seeing like where the chairs are placed in the room and where people are sitting and the way they're sitting and the light in the room and stuff like that. Because I can't rely as much on my hearing. And in that way, you could make an argument that in a sense, my vision is like my sense and my reliance on vision is stronger.
Yes.
And it's not necessarily because like, oh, I can see like the letters clear, like I have more than 20/20 vision, but it just means I'm a bit more like reliant on my visual cues in a way. I do believe in that. And I think the problem is like maybe people think of the definition of stronger as just like, is your hearing better according to this hearing test we've defined in the Western world and like the vision test we've defined. But I think we can think of these senses in a much more fluid way. I definitely think that has influence, and it's something that I haven't mentioned yet. But because of my hearing loss, I've been very much more aware of like my surroundings and the dynamics that are happening, the non-verbal cues people are giving to each other, the way they're looking around with their eyes.
Yes. That's so, this is all definitely very fascinating for me. And I'm, again, so glad we're having this conversation because it's making me think of the complexities of any sort of loss of, whether it's a visual loss or whatever it is, a visual impairment or just whatever. It really shapes people's lives in so many ways. And depending on whether you're born with it or it happened later in your life, that can also make your experience different depending on where you live, the kind of resources you have, the system you have, that can really shape. And I guess one question I was curious to hear is how the kind of support you've received and how support has helped you as you've navigated your journey. Yes.
Yeah. I feel like I have to attribute so much to my parents because of the close relationship we've had. And because of the length of time I've been with them, and they've helped me kind of carve out my own space and encouraged me to carve my own space. So long as I feel with a strong conviction to do so in a certain thing, yet they kept me kind of like always thinking about the bigger picture of like the world I'm living in.
Yes.
And in a way, you can kind of sense the parallels to the way I talk about my hearing loss to what I just said. But I really do kind of attribute a lot of my growth thanks to my parents. And also the little relationships that we have as, Bowdoin students with friends here, and also in online communities. I think one of the things that is like also a consequence of not being afraid to be uncomfortable is trying to seek out like non-traditional ways of looking at problems or dealing with problems. And that's also kind of bled into my academic life too.
Yes.
It was interesting. I was thinking about this. This is not super related, but you were talking about the difference that people were having dealing with loss when it's depending on when it happens in your life and also their lived experience. And one thing that's been on my mind a lot is, perfect pitch,
Yes.
where people can identify pitches. And I have that. And people have said that most musicians who have perfect pitch, once they reach like age 65, just like our hearing kind of changes and our vision kind of changes,
Really?
their perfect pitch also changes. And so people start hearing, for example, a D as a C sharp, or they start hearing a F as a G sharp, like.
Wow.
And people actually get really sad. They get depressed over that loss,
No.
particularly musicians, because they rely so much on being able to hear and have a framework for like deciphering what they're hearing. But that's what you said made me think about that, because maybe for someone who has perfect pitch but is not a musician, they won't be as affected.
Yeah. Wow.
That also kind of opens up another thing that I don't know if you've heard of this, but perfect pitch is more common in people who speak tonal languages.
Oh, I've not heard of this before.
There have been multiple studies where they looked at musicians in European conservatories where they don't really speak tonal languages. And I think it's a very low percentage of them have perfect pitch, maybe something like 10%. Then they looked at China and conservatory students there, and about 70%, upwards of 70% had perfect pitch. There's this audio, neurologist, but focused on the audio and the perception of audio, I think from UC Santa Barbara, but she has this very interesting theory where we all are born with some kind of perfect pitch, but depending on the language we have to learn, we learn to suppress our perfect pitch. So in the English language, you have to learn to know that the word dog is the same as dog and dog and dog and dog. But all of those are dog.
Yes.
But I'm obviously saying them with different tones. And as babies, her theory is that we learn to kind of like suppress the perfect pitch, and we actually don't end up having perfect pitch anymore.
Yes. That is definitely such a cool addition. And again, just thinking about how hearing, again, the point you made about musicians losing their perfect pitch of certain musicians
or
changing.
Like a shifting of it. Yeah.
Yes, a shifting, of the perfect pitch, and how it then leads to depression. Again, just because hearing is so fundamental to how we show up to the world and how we interact with people and interact with things, really, because not just even people. When you're playing the piano by yourself, you're not interacting with people, you're interacting with, the piano, and you're listening to the sound. And so I wanted to wrap up this episode with thinking about how we can take care of our auditory health. And I'm curious to hear what you have to say. I have the things down as well, but I'm curious to hear from your perspective, like the things that have helped you that you think can help others. And especially in a day and age where we have headphones and loudspeakers and so much going on. We have so much stimulation, and we have there's just a lot that our ears are taking in, and our auditory system has to process. And I was curious to hear in this final section some of the tips you might have about how we can take care of our auditory health. Yeah,
in a way, the world is getting noisier.
Yes.
Because we have cars now, and you have loudspeakers and all these things. I remember people saying, like, back in the day, the world was more smelly, right? Like, our sewer systems weren't as good, and people were dumping things on the streets. Maybe not that malicious, but something like that. And people were kind of, like, adjusted to that level of smell. But in a way, it's the same thing with sound. Like, sound is so much more prevalent today. And definitely people shouldn't be listening to headphones all the time and listening to loud music. Those are really basic things. But I think diet plays a really important role too. Sorry, I have some motion. I mean, I think that's something that people don't think a lot about in the Western world. So many times we think about taking medications for certain problems that we're having, but then they introduce new problems, or they introduce lifestyle habits that are not actually sustainable for longer periods of time. And so I really do think the diet plays an important role for the well-being of your senses, just like it does for what I mentioned earlier with oral health and your mental health.
Yes.
It has an effect on your brain, which relies on your hearing and relies on all of your other senses.
Yes.
It's not just something that's a function of hearing itself. Right? Yeah.
Yes. I totally agree with the diet part, and we've mentioned it a lot because of the kind of nutrients that your diet can provide. This is really important for, again, the formation of the nerves, your auditory nerves, and the connection that your brain makes with your hearing. So diet, in fact, does play an important role. And I'm glad you mentioned the part about not listening to your music through headphones all the time or putting things in your ears, because these can really impact your hearing and start causing preventable hearing loss. And there's something I read online that says you should follow the 60-60 rule, and it's like no more than 60% of your volume for longer than 60 minutes at a time. So
interesting.
Yeah, so you shouldn't be like having your headset in for hours on end, no. And it shouldn't be no more than 60% of your volume. Because again, this is something we take for granted. The fact that we can hear and we can perceive the world through hearing is such a beautiful thing. So that's definitely one. And I'm glad that you mentioned it. And I guess something little that I can add is taking listening breaks. Again, this is something that just can make a difference in your hearing. And I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Brian.
No, I do agree with the listening breaks. I definitely practice that. I listen to a lot of music, but it's not only just because I get sick of the music that I was like, stop it, but it does feel nice to just kind of like have your ears take a break for a bit.
Yes.
One of the funny other anecdotes of having hearing losses, every time I get new hearing aids, I learn new sounds in a way.
Oh.
I still distinctly remember when I got, I think the hearing aids before this one in high school, I finally heard my skin rustle with the clothes as I move around.
Oh.
I've never heard that before. And I was like, it was kind of bothering me actually. I was like, well, now I can hear that. Or like I hear my bones cracking more as I'm moving around. But that's, there are so many noises that we kind of learn to not think about as much, like the rustling of the clothes on your skin, or maybe even like the leaves that are, or the wind and stuff like that. But the same thing happens for when you're listening to music through headphones.
Yes.
If you listen to it too much, then you kind of get used to it. And if it's too loud, that's a bad thing.
Yes, I totally agree. And I love the way you spoke about the rustling of like leaves and even the sound of the wind. That's actually wow.
All the little things.
Yes, it's
or
really
when you're
nice.
sitting on the table and the cutlery and there's chopsticks, or like the sound those makes. Yeah,
the little things that we can sense. Wow.
Yeah.
And another thing I wanted to mention about taking care of your hearing and auditory health is not to ignore discomfort. And I know that sometimes it's easy to think, oh, my ear is just hurting or my eyes, but definitely not ignoring discomfort is a big one with taking care of your auditory health and making sure that you are treating an issue as soon as it comes up rather than waiting for it to get worse. So that's definitely a tip that I know will be useful for a lot of people. And then something about minding what you put into your ears. I know this can sound really basic, but I know like even using, let's say, earbuds to maybe clean your ears and all of that, it's really important to go to professionals if you want to do it. But being very mindful of what you put into your ear. And I'm going back to you, Brian. I'm curious to know if you ever like go to professionals to get your ears cleaned or what that's like. Because initially growing up, I used to use what we call like, I think they're called earbuds. I haven't used them in so long that I can't remember. But then I think
Q-tips in a way.
Yes, Q-tips, exactly. And I think I read somewhere or read and saw a video about how it can do you more harm than good and something. So I think that's why for years I haven't. But I'm curious to know what, especially because you use hearing aid, what that's like for you. Do you have do you go to professional or do you not do it at all?
Yeah, I think when I was growing up, my parents did kind of organize times where I go to a professional and they'd clean my ears. Because I'm wearing hearing aids all the time, there can be earwax buildup and stuff like that.
Yes.
And I don't do that anymore, and I haven't had issues so far. I haven't done a lot of research, and I haven't consulted with medical professionals, so I'm not sure what the deal is for that.
Yes.
But I feel what you said was really beautiful, to listen to your body and to, in a way, it's respecting your body. Whenever something happens, you treat it with care and with a serious nature.
Yes.
For the Q-tips, I know a lot of people, especially medical professionals, frown upon the use of Q-tips, and that's because as you kind of push it into your ear, you could push the earwax in, and if you keep going further, you could damage the eardrums.
Exactly.
Actually. But if you just use it for the outside of your ear, after you've showered and there's some water buildup just on the side, as long as you're not kind of jamming it inside your ear,
yes,
it is fine. But that's definitely something that's you need to be careful with it.
Yes.
Yeah, I do use Q-tips to just clean the outside of my ear, or cotton swabs. And that's just because I wear hearing aids all the time, and there sometimes will be oils left over, and I just after I shower, I want to make sure it's somewhat clean. But I haven't done a deeper clean in a while.
Yes.
And I think that's also with it plays into diet too.
Yes.
And also just your body. Every body works differently, and that's another thing I think sometimes Western science ignores. And yeah, I say treat your body with respect in a way.
That is definitely important. And you mentioned diet again. I it's making me even think deeper about the diet subject, because really your diet supports your blood flow to your ear, and it reduces the risk of hearing loss over time. It might surprise you to know that poor diets that are high in sugar, high in sodium, high in trans fats can contribute to chronic inflammation, high blood pressure, and diabetes, which can then lead to hearing loss, age-related hearing loss. So diet is definitely a big thing. Also, it's really interesting that excess salt can contribute to fluid imbalance in the inner ear.
Interesting.
Yes, and so it can worsen ear conditions. And so diet is really important, and having antioxidants in your diet, having vitamins A and C and E, having omega-3 fatty acids and magnesium. So many of the things we've spoken about before, but really just, I think, I don't want us to get into the weeds of this, so I'm not going to go into all of that because that can be overwhelming. But just knowing that your diet plays a huge role in your hearing, and even when you don't realize it, the things you eat impact your hearing in a very significant way. So I just wanted to touch on diet again for a little bit before getting on to the two last things I wanted to mention, and then handing it over to you again about ways to protect our hearings and really covering our ears when we're in loud environments. So whether you're in a place with construction or you're in a place with a lot of sound, covering your ears is really, really important. If not, that can impact your hearing, and that can do a lot of damage to your hearing. So really making sure that, when you're in a place with loud hearing, you're saying, I'm being cognizant, okay, I need to step out, or I need to do XYZ. That is a really important thing to do. And then the last thing I wanted to say is just making sure that you're getting your hearing checked as often as you can. But I wanted to really leave the last word for you Brian, about how people, based on your experiences, and if there advice you really wanted to give people about taking care of their auditory health, what would that be?
It feels a bit more general, but I really like the idea of reflecting on what you're experiencing, the changes you're experiencing, like whether that be from the external world or the changes you're experiencing in your internal world, like your body, and making sense of it all and trying to kind of poke deeper on these experiences, these things you're experiencing, because it gives you a better understanding of who you are as a person and how you deal with these new things that are happening, and it makes you a bit more resilient. And one thing that I kind of am grateful for from my hearing loss is it's kind of forced me to be more reflective on this part of my life. Like, how am I dealing with conversations, and how do I deal with being uncomfortable and having to ask people for help, and in a way being vulnerable. And it's given me a lot more comfort in myself and being confident and understanding when I need to get help, and understanding when I should put on like earplugs, even like in a concert. Like, that's something, it's just like, I feel like a lot of us do a really good job with brushing our teeth in the morning and then brushing at night before we sleep. And earplugs is another one of those things. It's like, it's practicing good hygiene in a way for your ears, and it's thinking in a way that's not just about, I want to experience the concert in its whole for now, and we're not thinking about what happens actually if you keep doing that.
Yes.
And the effect it has on your health. And so this like constant reflection and constant questioning of yourself is something I've learned. It's my own interpretation of how I have navigated my hearing loss. But that's just kind of what I want to offer. Like, this is kind of one of the pivotal lessons I've learned from reflecting on my hearing loss.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you so much, Brian. With that,
well, thank you for having me on the Blooming Daily. I'm so honored to be a part of it. I've always seen the posts. I was like, wow, I can't believe I'm a part of it now.
Yes, and thank you for coming, because this was an incredible, incredible time. Thank you to everyone who tuned in. I know that I hope that this was as insightful to you as it was to me, or even more insightful. And if you have any questions, please feel free to send them on any of the podcasting platforms you're listening on, or any of our social media pages. If they're for Brian, feel free to highlight those, and we'll make sure to get those over to him. But until then, please remember to share this episode with anyone you think will find this important to listen to, which again is everyone, because our auditory health is important for each and every one of us. So I hope you share this with every and anyone, and that you can reflect on your own experiences with your auditory health and your hearing, and how it impacts the way you show up to the world, and it impacts just who you are as a person. So I will catch you on the next episode, and until then, stay well. Bye.
Bye-bye.